The winter hike was supposed to be an adventure, just another afternoon exploring the frozen trails near their mountain home. But for 12-year-old Caleb Harris and his 8-year-old brother Jonah, everything changed when they heard the faint cries echoing from the frozen creek below. They scrambled down the icy bank and found 2 tiny German shepherd puppies huddled together, their fur crusted with snow, their whimpers barely cutting through the wind. Caleb didn't hesitate. Jonah didn't think twice. They scooped the freezing animals into their arms and carried them home, whispering, "We've got you now. You're safe." But what they didn't know was that these weren't ordinary strays. And by sunrise, armed police officers surrounded their house, weapons drawn, demanding the family surrender what was inside immediately. What these puppies truly were left everyone in shock. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you are listening from. Let's begin. The storm hit harder than the forecast predicted. What started as light flurries that morning had transformed into a full-blown blizzard by early afternoon, the kind that turned familiar trails into white mazes. Caleb Harris stood at the kitchen window, watching fat snowflakes slam against the glass, his breath fogging the pane. Behind him, his 8-year-old brother Jonah bounced on his toes, already bundled in his oversized orange coat. "Come on, Caleb! You promised we'd explore before it gets too bad," Jonah whined, tugging on his brother's sleeve. Their mother glanced up from her laptop at the kitchen table, her eyes narrowing. "Boys, I don't think this is a good day for hiking. The weather service says this storm is going to get worse." But Caleb had already made up his mind. At 12, he was old enough to know the trails blindfolded, and he'd never let his little brother down. "We'll stay on the main path, Mom. Just an hour. We'll be back before dark." She hesitated, then sighed. "1 hour. And keep your phones on." The brothers burst out the door before she could change her mind, their boots crunching through the fresh powder that already covered their front porch. The world outside had transformed into a ghostly landscape of white and gray. Pine trees sagged under the weight of snow, and the wind carried a sharp bite that stung their exposed cheeks. Caleb pulled his navy blue jacket tighter and started toward the familiar trail that wound through the forest behind their house. They walked in comfortable silence at first, Jonah occasionally stopping to examine animal tracks or throw snowballs at tree trunks. The deeper they ventured, the quieter the world became, as if the storm had swallowed all sound except the crunch of their footsteps and the whisper of wind through frozen branches. When they reached the old wooden bridge that spanned the frozen creek, Caleb paused. Something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. He was about to suggest they turn back when a sound cut through the storm, faint, desperate, barely audible over the howling wind. A whimper. Jonah grabbed his brother's arm. "Did you hear that?" They moved to the edge of the bridge, peering down into the snowy ravine below. The sound came again, clearer now, a weak cry that made Caleb's chest tighten. Without a word, he scrambled down the bank, his boots sliding on hidden ice. Jonah followed, their hearts racing as they pushed through snow-laden branches. Near the base of a fallen log, half buried in drifting snow, 2 tiny German shepherd puppies huddled together. Their black and tan fur was crusted with ice, their small bodies shaking violently. One lifted its head weakly, dark eyes finding the boys, and let out a trembling whine before collapsing back into the snow. "Oh God!" Caleb breathed, dropping to his knees. "They're dying!" The puppies barely moved as Caleb scooped them into his arms, wrapping his jacket around their frozen bodies. Jonah peeled off his orange coat without hesitation, draping it over them for extra warmth. The smaller puppy whimpered weakly against Caleb's chest, its whole body trembling in violent shivers. They had to move fast. The boys scrambled back up the snowy bank, their boots slipping on ice as they clutched their precious cargo. The wind screamed around them, but neither complained about the cold biting through their thin shirts. All that mattered was getting the puppies somewhere warm before it was too late. By the time they reached their house, both brothers were shaking almost as hard as the animals in their arms. Caleb paused at the back door, pressing a finger to his lips. Through the kitchen window, he could see their mother still working at her laptop, her back to them. Their father's truck wasn't in the driveway yet. He wouldn't be home from work for another hour. "We can't tell them," Caleb whispered urgently. "They'll make us take them to a shelter or call animal control. These guys might not survive the wait." Jonah nodded, his teeth chattering. "The back stairs?" "Exactly. Quiet as possible." They slipped through the door with practiced stealth, the kind perfected through years of sneaking cookies before dinner. The old hinges barely creaked. They tiptoed across the mudroom, past the kitchen entrance where their mother's fingers clicked on her keyboard, and up the narrow back staircase that led directly to their shared bedroom on the second floor. Only when the door clicked shut behind them did they breathe. Okay, Caleb said, his voice shaking as he laid the puppies gently on his bed. "We need towels, blankets, everything warm we can find." Jonah was already pulling every spare blanket from their closet, creating a nest on the floor between their beds. Caleb grabbed towels from the bathroom they shared, his hands moving frantically. The puppies lay motionless on his comforter, their breathing shallow and rapid. "Are they going to die?" Jonah's voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. "No," Caleb said firmly, though fear gnawed at his gut. "We won't let them." He began gently rubbing the smaller puppy with a towel, trying to dry the ice from its fur and stimulate circulation like he'd seen in a nature documentary once. Jonah did the same with the other, his small hands moving carefully over the frozen coat. Slowly, painfully slowly, the ice began to melt. "Body heat?" Caleb remembered suddenly. "We need to warm them with our bodies." Without hesitation, both brothers crawled into the blanket nest, cradling a puppy against their chests. Caleb pulled his comforter over all of them, creating a warm cocoon. He could feel the tiny heartbeat fluttering against his ribs, too fast, too weak. "Come on, little guy," he whispered, pressing his cheek against the wet fur. "Stay with us." Jonah hummed softly to his puppy, a wordless tune their mother used to sing when they were scared. Minutes crawled by. The room was silent except for their breathing and the storm rattling the windows. Then, finally, the smaller puppy shifted. Its shivering began to slow. A tiny pink tongue peeked out, licking weakly at Caleb's hand. "He's warming up," Caleb gasped. Jonah's puppy stirred too, nestling deeper into the blankets with a soft sigh. Both brothers looked at each other, relief flooding their faces. They'd done it. The puppies were going to survive. An hour later, the puppies were finally dry and breathing normally. Color had returned to their noses, and the pads of their paws no longer felt like ice. They still slept deeply, exhausted from their ordeal, curled together in the blanket nest. Caleb sat cross-legged beside them, watching their little chests rise and fall, while Jonah had snuck downstairs to grab water bowls and some leftover chicken from dinner. Caleb reached out gently, running his fingers through the larger puppy's fur, checking for injuries. That's when he felt it, something hard and unyielding beneath the thick coat around the puppy's neck. His brow furrowed. He carefully parted the fur to get a better look. His breath caught. The puppy wore a collar, but not the kind you'd buy at a pet store. This was heavy-duty, made from some kind of reinforced nylon or tactical webbing. The material was industrial grade, the kind that wouldn't fray or break no matter how hard you pulled. But what made Caleb's stomach tighten was what he saw embedded in the collar itself. A small metal plate, barely larger than his thumbnail, was riveted into the fabric. Etched into the brushed steel surface were a series of numbers, K9TF0847. Below that, a strange insignia, angular, severe, like something military. It wasn't a paw print or a cute dog bone. It looked official, tactical, like something you'd see on government equipment. "What the hell?" Caleb whispered. Jonah bounded back into the room, carefully balancing 2 bowls of water and a plate of shredded chicken. "I told Mom I was hungry." He stopped, seeing his brother's face. "What's wrong?" "Look at this." Caleb gestured to the collar. Jonah knelt beside him, squinting at the metal plate. "Is that a serial number?" "I think so." Caleb's fingers moved to the smaller puppy, checking its neck. Sure enough, an identical collar, same heavy-duty construction, same metal plate. This one read, K9TF0848. The serial numbers were sequential. "They're numbered. Like equipment. Maybe they belong to someone. Like a police dog training program?" Jonah suggested, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Caleb shook his head slowly. "Police puppies don't get collars like this. And why would they be abandoned in a snowstorm in the middle of nowhere?" He examined the insignia more closely, tracing the sharp angular design with his fingertip. It looked like overlapping geometric shapes, maybe a stylized shield or tactical unit symbol. Nothing he recognized. The larger puppy stirred, letting out a small yawn before settling back into sleep. Its collar shifted, and Caleb noticed something else. A tiny reinforced loop on the side, the kind designed to attach to a leash or restraint system. Professional grade. Military grade. "Caleb, I don't like this," Jonah whispered, his earlier excitement fading into something else. Something that felt like fear. "These aren't normal puppies, are they?" Caleb wanted to reassure his little brother, to tell him everything was fine, that they'd just stumbled on expensive pets that wandered away from some rich owner's estate. But looking at those cold metal plates, those tactical collars built for animals that weren't supposed to be pets at all, he couldn't shake the growing dread settling in his chest. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think they are." By evening, the puppies had fully awakened. They lapped eagerly at the water bowls and devoured the shredded chicken Jonah offered, their tiny tails wagging for the first time. The brothers sat on the floor watching them, relief washing over their faces. The smaller puppy had bright, alert eyes and moved with surprising energy despite the trauma. The larger one seemed calmer, more measured in its movements. "We should name them," Jonah said, grinning as the smaller puppy climbed into his lap. "I want to call this one Aspen. And this one can be Willow," Caleb added, scratching behind the larger puppy's ears. But as the night wore on, Caleb began noticing things that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It started small. When both puppies finished eating, they moved to the same spot simultaneously, positioning themselves side by side facing the bedroom door, exactly 3 feet apart. Not close together like normal puppies seeking comfort, but spaced with unnatural precision, like soldiers standing guard. "That's weird," Jonah muttered, tilting his head. "It's like they practiced that." Caleb waved his hand, trying to get their attention. Neither puppy looked at him. Their eyes remained locked on the door, ears perked forward, bodies perfectly still. It wasn't the playful alertness of young dogs. It was disciplined, focused, almost robotic. "Hey, Willow." "Aspen." Nothing. Not even a glance. Then Jonah sneezed, a sudden loud sound in the quiet room. Both puppies' heads snapped toward him in perfect unison, the movement so synchronized it looked choreographed. They held a position for exactly 3 seconds, assessed him, then returned their gaze to the door with identical precision. "Okay, that's really creepy," Jonah whispered. Caleb stood up slowly, his mind racing. He walked toward his desk, deliberately casual, and without thinking raised his hand in a stopping gesture, palm out, fingers up. He'd seen police officers use it in movies. Both puppies dropped instantly into a down position, their bodies flattening against the floor, as if they'd been hit with an invisible command. They didn't whine or look confused. They simply obeyed, their eyes still fixed forward, waiting. "Holy!" Caleb's hand trembled as he lowered it. "Jonah, did you see that? What did you do?" Jonah's voice was barely a whisper. I raised my hand." Caleb demonstrated again, this time making a different gesture, pointing 2 fingers forward like a gun. Immediately, both puppies rose to a sitting position, back straight, attention unwavering. Perfect synchronization. Perfect discipline. "They're trained," Caleb breathed. "Like, professionally trained. These aren't pet commands, Jonah. This is something else." The younger boy hugged himself, suddenly cold despite the warm room. "But they're just puppies. They can't be more than 8 or 10 weeks old. How could they be trained like this already?" Caleb had no answer. Normal puppy training took months, sometimes years. These animals responded to tactical hand signals they'd never been taught by the boys, with precision that would make adult working dogs jealous. And they were barely old enough to be weaned. Downstairs, a door closed. Their father's voice called out a greeting to their mother. Both puppies' heads tilted in perfect unison toward the sound, their bodies tensing. Waiting. Watching. Like sentinels guarding something the brothers couldn't see. Caleb managed to sneak the puppies through dinner by claiming he and Jonah had homework to finish. Their parents seemed satisfied with the excuse, though their mother did comment that the boys seemed unusually quiet. By 9 o'clock, when they were supposed to be asleep, both brothers lay wide awake in their beds, watching Willow and Aspen maintain their vigilant position by the door. "This is so weird," Jonah whispered across the darkness. "Normal puppies would be playing or sleeping or chewing on stuff." "I know." Caleb stared at the ceiling, his mind churning through possibilities. Government dogs? Military rejects? Stolen property? None of it made sense. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. Maybe we can search online for that insignia on their collars." Jonah rolled onto his side, facing the window. The storm had finally died down, leaving everything outside blanketed in fresh snow that glowed silver under the moonlight. Tree branches hung heavy with white powder, and the forest looked peaceful, almost magical. Then he saw it. A light. Faint at first, bobbing between the distant trees like a firefly. Then another. And another. "Caleb!" His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "Caleb, look!" His brother sat up immediately, sensing the fear in Jonah's tone. "What?" "The woods! There are lights!" Caleb scrambled out of bed and pressed his face against the cold window glass. His stomach dropped. 3, maybe 4 flashlight beams swept methodically through the forest, moving in a search pattern. They were too organized, too deliberate to be hikers or neighbors. The lights moved low to the ground, sweeping side to side, searching. And they were getting closer. Both puppies had abandoned their post at the door. They now sat beneath the window, completely silent, their bodies rigid with tension. Willow's lips curled back slightly, revealing tiny teeth. Aspen's ears lay flat against his skull. Neither made a sound, but their message was clear: danger. "Who is that?" Jonah breathed, crawling out of bed to join his brother at the window. "I don't know." Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The lights were close enough now that he could make out shapes. 3 figures dressed in dark clothing, moving with military efficiency through the snow. They spread out in a wide formation, flashlights sweeping every shadow, every hollow, every place something small might hide. One of the figures stopped abruptly, crouching near the frozen creek, exactly where the boys had found the puppies. The beam of light illuminated footprints in the snow, their footprints, still visible despite the continuing snowfall. The figure pulled out what looked like a radio, speaking into it urgently. "They're tracking them," Caleb whispered, ice flooding his veins. "They're tracking the puppies." The figure stood and pointed directly toward their house. The other two immediately changed direction, their lights now sweeping toward the Harris property. Jonah grabbed his brother's arm, his fingers digging in hard. "Caleb, what do we do?" Below the window, both puppies remained frozen in position, their dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. Watching. Waiting. They knew exactly what was coming. And so, Caleb realized with dawning horror, did whoever was hunting them. Caleb didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat by the window through the long hours of darkness, watching the figures sweep through the woods until finally, around 3 in the morning, they retreated. But he knew they'd be back. The puppies knew it too. They never relaxed, never closed their eyes, maintaining their silent vigil beneath the window. When the first gray light of dawn crept across the snow-covered landscape, Jonah stirred in his bed, groaning softly. "Did they come back?" "Not yet," Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse. "But—" The first siren cut through the morning silence like a knife. Then another. And another. Both boys rushed to the window. What they saw made their blood run cold. Squad cars were pouring up their long driveway, light bars flashing red and blue against the white snow. But these weren't just local police. Black SUVs with tinted windows formed a perimeter around the property. A K-9 unit pulled up, and Caleb could see the silhouette of a German Shepherd in the back, its handler emerging with tactical gear strapped across his chest. "Oh God!" Jonah breathed. "Oh God, Caleb, what's happening?" Downstairs, their father's voice rose in confusion. "What the hell?" Heavy footsteps thundered toward the front door. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice cold and official. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have reason to believe classified property has been recovered and is currently inside this residence. We need all occupants to exit the building immediately with your hands visible." Their mother screamed. The sound echoed up the staircase, filled with terror and confusion. Caleb grabbed Jonah's shoulders. "Listen to me. We have to go down there. We have to tell them the truth. But the puppies will be taken away." Caleb's voice cracked. "I know. But if we don't cooperate, this gets worse." Willow and Aspen remained perfectly still, their eyes now fixed on the bedroom door. They could hear everything, the chaos downstairs, the authoritative voices outside, the mechanical clicks of weapons being readied. Their small bodies trembled, but not from cold this time. From recognition. The brother's father appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Boys, what the hell is going on? The FBI is surrounding our house, asking about classified property. Do either of you know anything about?" His eyes found the puppies. His mouth fell open. "What are those doing here? Dad, we can't explain. Now!" The loudspeaker boomed again. "Exit the building with your hands up, or we will enter by force." Through the window, Caleb watched as more vehicles arrived. Not just FBI, but men in different uniforms he didn't recognize. Military, maybe. They carried equipment that looked far too serious for a simple missing pet case. One team was setting up what appeared to be a mobile command center. This wasn't about lost puppies. This was a federal operation. "Boys, downstairs now," their father commanded, his voice shaking. "And bring those dogs with you." Caleb scooped up Willow while Jonah cradled Aspen. The puppies didn't resist, but their bodies remained rigid, prepared. As the family descended the stairs toward the front door where armed agents waited, Caleb realized with sinking certainty that whatever these puppies were whatever they represented, it was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The Harris family stood on their front porch in the freezing morning air, hands raised, facing a semicircle of armed federal agents. Caleb clutched Willow against his chest while Jonah held Aspen, both boys shaking, from cold, from fear, from the surreal nightmare their simple rescue had become. A woman in a dark suit stepped forward, her FBI badge glinting in the early light. She was tall, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that immediately locked onto the puppies. Her expression shifted from stern authority to something like relief. "Special Agent Victoria Chin," she announced, lowering her weapon. "You can put your hands down. You're not in trouble." Her gaze moved to the boys. "But I need those animals. Right now. What the hell is this about?" Their father's voice shook with barely controlled anger. "You terrorized my family at dawn over 2 stray puppies? They're not strays, Mr. Harris." Chen gestured, and 2 agents in tactical gear approached, reaching for the puppies. Caleb instinctively stepped back, holding Willow tighter. "Please," Chen's voice softened slightly. "I understand you're confused. Let us secure the animals, and I'll explain everything." Reluctantly, tearfully, the brothers handed over Willow and Aspen. The agents carried them to a specialized K-9 transport van, handling them with careful precision. The puppies didn't struggle, but their eyes remained fixed on Caleb and Jonah. Chin motioned the family inside, away from the chaos. In their living room, surrounded by agents securing the perimeter, she pulled out a tablet and brought up photographs. Crime scene images. Laboratory facilities with shattered glass and blood on sterile floors. 72 hours ago, there was a break-in at a classified government breeding facility in Colorado, she began. "Not just any facility. This program develops and trains elite tactical K-9 units for the most sensitive operations. Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, asset protection." She swiped to another image showing rows of sophisticated kennels. "These aren't pets. They're weapons. Genetically selected, neurologically enhanced through specialized training protocols from birth." Jonah's mother pressed her hand to her mouth. "Enhanced? What does that mean?" "It means they're worth approximately $300,000 each on the black market," Chin said flatly. "The thieves who hit the facility weren't random criminals. They're part of an international syndicate that steals and sells military assets, weapons, technology, trained animals to the highest bidder. Terrorist organizations, drug cartels, foreign intelligence services, anyone willing to pay." Caleb felt sick. "But they're just puppies. They're barely old enough to respond to tactical hand signals, to maintain defensive positions, to operate in synchronized units." Chin's eyebrow arched. "You noticed, didn't you? That's because they've been in training since they were 3 weeks old. Neurological imprinting, conditioned responses. These animals will grow into the most effective tactical K-9s ever produced." She leaned forward. "Which is exactly why some very dangerous people want them back. The men in the woods last night," Caleb whispered. Chin's expression darkened. "You saw them? How many?" 3. Maybe 4. They were tracking footprints from where we found the puppies." The agent immediately spoke into her radio, her voice urgent. "We have confirmation of hostile presence. Tighten the perimeter. They know the location." She turned back to the family, and for the first time, Caleb saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris, I need you to understand something. The people who stole these puppies have already killed 2 security guards and a federal agent. They've invested heavily in this operation, and they're not going to walk away empty-handed." Agent Chen was still briefing the family when her radio erupted with urgent chatter. "Contact! Multiple hostiles approaching from the North Tree Line. They're armed, Repeat, they are armed. The living room exploded into motion. Agents rushed to windows, weapons drawn. Chin grabbed the Harris family, pushing them toward the back of the house. Get to the interior hallway now. Stay away from windows. What's happening? Their mother screamed. They're coming for the puppies, Chin said grimly, pulling her sidearm. And they're not waiting for negotiations. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence. Glass exploded somewhere upstairs. More shots followed, rapid, professional, coordinated. These weren't warning shots. The criminals were breaching the perimeter with military precision. Caleb's father shoved his wife and sons toward the hallway, but Caleb broke away, sprinting toward the stairs. The puppies! They're still in the van outside! Caleb, no! His father roared. But Caleb was already halfway up, taking the steps 3 at a time. He burst into his bedroom and rushed to the window. Below, he could see the chaos unfolding. 4 men in tactical gear were advancing on the house, laying down suppressing fire, while agents scrambled for cover. One of the criminals was moving toward the K-9 transport van, toward Willow and Aspen. More gunfire. An agent went down, clutching his shoulder. The criminal reached the van, yanking the back door open. But before he could grab the puppies, another agent tackled him from the side. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snow. Then Caleb saw something that made his blood freeze. A 5th man had circled around the chaos. He was climbing through a shattered first-floor window, entering the house. Dad! Caleb screamed, racing back downstairs. They're inside! He hit the hallway just as his father appeared, pushing the family toward the basement door. But it was too late. The intruder rounded the corner, a handgun raised, his face obscured by a black balaclava. His eyes were cold, calculating, focused. Where are the units? His voice was accented, Eastern European maybe. Tell me now, and nobody dies. Agent Chin emerged from the living room, weapon trained on him. Drop it! FBI! The man didn't drop it. Instead, he grabbed Jonah, yanking the 8-year-old against his chest, gun pressed to his temple. Jonah screamed, his small body rigid with terror. The units, the man repeated, or the boy dies. Time seemed to stop. Caleb watched his little brother's terrified face, saw his mother's silent scream, felt his father's helpless rage. Chin held her weapon steady, but they all knew she couldn't shoot without risking Jonah. Then, from somewhere behind them, came a sound that made everyone freeze. A low, synchronized growl. 2 agents burst through the front door, and with them came Willow and Aspen. But these weren't the helpless, shivering puppies the boys had rescued. These were trained tactical assets, and someone had just threatened their pack. The puppies' eyes locked onto the man holding Jonah. Their small bodies tensed, muscles coiling like springs. They were barely 10 weeks old, but the look in their eyes was ancient, predatory, and absolutely lethal. The man saw them, and his grip on Jonah faltered for just a second. That was all the opening they needed. Willow moved first. Despite her small size, she launched herself at the man with shocking speed, her puppy teeth sinking into his gun hand with precision that seemed impossible for her age. The man screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor as he released Jonah and tried to shake her off. But Willow held on with terrier-like determination, her jaws locked, her body swinging wildly. Aspen went for the legs. He hit the man's ankle with the force of a small missile, his teeth finding the vulnerable Achilles tendon. The criminal went down hard, crashing into the hallway wall with a roar of pain and fury. Agent Chin was on him in seconds, weapon pressed to his skull. Don't move! But the chaos wasn't over. Through the broken windows came the sound of more gunfire. 2 more criminals had breached the house from different entry points, desperate and violent. One emerged from the kitchen, weapon sweeping the hallway. He saw the puppies, saw his partner pinned on the ground, and his eyes lit with recognition. "There!" he shouted to someone behind him. "The units are here!" He raised his gun toward Willow, who still had her jaws clamped on the first man's hand. Caleb didn't think. He threw himself forward, grabbing a heavy ceramic vase from the hallway table and hurling it with all his strength. It struck the man's shoulder, shattering on impact. The shot went wild, punching a hole in the ceiling. Federal agents flooded in from both sides. The house became a war zone of shouting commands, tactical movements, and the desperate struggles of men who knew they were cornered. The second intruder tried to grab Aspen, reaching for the puppy with gloved hands, but the small dog twisted with impossible agility, his teeth finding the man's wrist through the fabric. "Jesus Christ!" the man howled, stumbling backward. A third criminal appeared at the top of the stairs, weapon drawn, eyes scanning frantically. He spotted the puppies and started to descend, but Willow and Aspen moved in perfect synchronization, releasing their current targets and positioning themselves between the threat and the Harris family. Their small bodies were tensed, ready, their growls harmonizing in a warning that needed no translation. The man hesitated. Just for a moment. Just long enough. 3 agents hit him simultaneously, driving him to the ground in a controlled takedown. His weapon skittered across the hardwood floor. More agents poured through the front door, establishing control room by room, shouting, "Clear!" as they secured each space. The fourth criminal made one last desperate attempt, bursting from the basement stairs with wild eyes. He lunged for Jonah, perhaps thinking a hostage was his only way out. But before anyone could react, both puppies were on him. Despite their size, despite being barely 2 months old, they moved like trained soldiers, Willow going high for his arm, Aspen sweeping his legs. The man went down in a heap, and this time he stayed down, agents swarming over him with zip ties and barked commands. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The house fell silent except for heavy breathing and the crackle of radios. For criminals lay face down in various states of restraint, blood staining the hardwood from bite wounds and tactical takedowns. Federal agents secured the perimeter, checking for additional threats. And in the center of the chaos, 2 tiny German Shepherd puppies sat side by side, perfectly composed, their dark eyes alert but calm, protecting their family. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, checking everyone for injuries. Caleb and Jonah sat together on the couch, wrapped in blankets despite not being hurt, watching agents process the crime scene. Their parents spoke in hushed, shocked tones with investigators. The 4 criminals were loaded into separate vehicles, their faces blank with defeat. Willow and Aspen sat at the boys' feet, calm now, their tails wagging softly whenever Caleb or Jonah reached down to touch them. Agent Chen approached, her expression unreadable. She crouched in front of the brothers, her eyes moving between them and the puppies. "What you did today was incredibly brave. And incredibly stupid." Caleb's throat tightened. "Are you taking them away now?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching as Willow nudged Jonah's hand with her nose, seeking comfort. Aspen had crawled into Caleb's lap, something no tactical K9 was supposed to do. But the puppy's eyes never left the boy's face, and his small body trembled, not from cold or fear, but from the adrenaline crash of combat. "The protocol is clear," Chen said slowly. "These animals are federal property. Classified assets worth more than most people's houses. They're supposed to return to the program, continue their training, and eventually be deployed with elite tactical units." She paused. "That's what's supposed to happen." "But?" Jonah's voice was barely a whisper. Chen stood, pulling out her phone. She made a call, spoke quietly for several minutes, then ended it with a decisive nod. When she turned back to the boys, Something had shifted in her expression. "I've been training K9 units for 15 years," she said. "I've seen hundreds of dogs go through the program. The bond between handler and animal is everything. It's what makes them effective, what keeps them alive in the field. And what I just witnessed." She shook her head slowly. "Those puppies didn't protect federal agents. They didn't protect their trainers or their facility. They protected you too." Caleb's heart hammered. "What does that mean?" "It means the bond is already formed. Trying to break it now could damage them psychologically, make them unsuitable for tactical work." Chen pulled out an official-looking document. "My superiors have authorized an unprecedented arrangement. Conditional, of course. You will both undergo proper K9 handler training. Weekly sessions with federal instructors. Strict protocols. Security clearances for your entire family. And when Willow and Aspen are old enough, you'll work with them on approved operations." "Wait," their father interrupted, stepping forward. "You're saying our sons, 12 and 8 years old, would become federal K9 handlers?" "Junior handlers, under supervision," Chun clarified. "It's never been done before. But then again, we've never had civilians risk their lives to save classified assets or watch 10-week-old puppies take down armed criminals to protect their chosen pack." Jonah threw his arms around Aspen, tears streaming down his face. Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Willow licked his cheek, her tail wagging furiously. "So they can stay?" Caleb finally managed. Agent Chen smiled, a real smile, tired but genuine. "They can stay. You saved them. They saved you. That's a bond worth protecting." She placed the document on the table. "Welcome to the program, handlers. You've got a lot to learn." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the snow-covered property. And in the Harris living room, 2 brothers and 2 puppies began a partnership that would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds formed in the coldest, darkest moments.